Alrighty, chat. So today we're going to be watching and reacting to a video I find interesting because it's part of my childhood. It is about Pokemon, specifically Red and Blue. So the OG games here on Game Boy. And it's a video by ThatGuyGlen. And it is how Pokemon Red and Blue were made and had the player use weapons initially. Ooh. So it sounds like a little bit of a history behind Pokemon, behind GameFreak, who developed it. So this should be interesting. It should be an interesting watch here. Okay. Fascinating origins of world's biggest media franchise.
The first generation of Pokemon games is a fascinating tale that involves real-life bug catching, trademark difficulties, almost losing years of work, and defying the expectations of Nintendo, who didn't understand the concept of collecting monsters. To get the full picture, we have to go all the way back to the 70s, when a child named Satoshi Tajiri developed a fascination with catching and collecting insects in a western Tokyo suburb called Mashida, where Satoshi grew up. He enjoyed exploring the rural parts, such as rice fields, rivers and forests. On his adventures, Satoshi searched for insects, fish and other creatures. There was something about the way they moved that mesmerized him. He studied all the creatures he brought home and thought of new ideas of how to catch them. For example, most of the other kids would catch beetles using honey, but Satoshi had the idea of putting a stone under a tree, because beetles sleep during the day and they like sleeping under stones. It made finding them a breeze, and as a result, Satoshi would collect more bugs than all of his friends.
This is a very... This makes a lot of sense. This is kind of eye-opening for the origins of how Pokemon was created. This is very eye-opening here.
Little discoveries like that excited him each and every time. His bug-catching skills also earned him the nickname Dr. Bug among the neighboring kids.
Dr. Bug.
Aside from exploring his neighborhood, Satoshi was also fascinated with Ultraman on TV and in manga. He stated in an interview with Time magazine that if games didn't exist, he would probably be making anime. Satoshi also frequented the local arcade hall starting around 1978 and became hooked on Space Invaders, which got him more interested in video games. Back then, there was barely any games media, at least not where Satoshi lived. Therefore, he took reins into his own hands and created GameFreak magazine in 1983.
Wow, 1983. GameFreak magazine.
Around the time he started going to college. The magazine was completely handwritten and stapled together by Satoshi himself. It featured secret tips and tricks on how to beat arcade games and was available in specialist bookstores for 200 yen. The most popular issue managed to sell over 10,000 copies, so at a pretty young age, Satoshi already had a real business going. One of the people that bought the magazine was none other than Ken Sugimori, who would become the primary character designer and art director for Pokemon. Ken enjoyed reading the magazine and got in touch with Satoshi to offer his services as an illustrator. From then on, the pair collaborated on GameFreak magazine until it was discontinued. They quickly became friends and bonded over their love of arcade games. One day, Ken and Satoshi talked about how arcade games are often very similar and asked themselves what they would do differently if given the opportunity to develop a video game. Some of the other people reading the fan-made magazine were programmers and had access to game development tools. Pretty soon I had some contributors and we'd all get together and talk about games. The more I learned about games, the more frustrated I became because the games weren't very good. I could tell a good game from a bad game. My conclusion was, let's make our own games.
This is very eye-opening. Yeah, if you look back in the Atari days and you actually play some of those games, they're all so similar. It's all just side-scrolling or just shooter, top-down shooter type of game. I can see where the yearning for a new style of game during that time would bring lots of popularity.
By the time GameFreak started developing games, Satoshi's neighborhood had completely changed. A place that was once rich with rivers and forests had now been replaced with housing facilities, office buildings, and stores. Satoshi thought about all the kids who were now unable to explore nature and collect its mysterious creatures. It was this line of thinking that sparked the initial idea for Pokemon. In the face of more and more urbanization, the young developer wanted to provide an opportunity for kids these days to feel that sensation of going on an adventure, exploring unknown locations, and discovering the local critters and creatures.
That's so wholesome, to be honest. That's so wholesome. Oh, wow.
This, combined with his favorite activities such as playing video games and watching Ultraman, laid the groundwork for the first Pokemon games. However, his idea didn't completely click until he saw the original Game Boy in 1989. The link cable capabilities of Nintendo's first handheld console seemed like a perfect fit for Pokemon. Satoshi visualized actual living organisms moving back and forth across the cable. Furthermore, once Satoshi saw the success of the Final Fantasy Legend, the very first RPG for the Game Boy, he was convinced that his idea for a monster collecting RPG was not only possible on the Game Boy, but that it was the only system that could bring his dream game to life. Soon after, Satoshi and Ken officially founded GameFreak as a video game studio, and development on Pokémon began in 1990. The team kicked things off by creating a concept pitch document that contained a lot of early design sketches.
Capsule Monsters. Wow. Well, I think we all know that Pokemon is kind of short for Pocket Monsters, but apparently Capsule Monsters was one original idea here in 1990 when it was created. Look, you can already kind of see Charizard almost, and then some sort of Godzilla character on the bottom left.
As well as how the game would work. Interestingly, it depicted quite a different version of the world of Pokemon, and this makes sense given that Satoshi and the other creators originally set out to make a more traditional RPG-like game. For starters, the project's original name was Capsule Monsters, inspired by both the popular Japanese capsule toys called Gashapon dispensed from vending machines and Ultraman's Capsule Kaiju. It's this latter inspiration, however, that got the team into trouble trying to trademark the name, and they eventually had to change it to Pocket Monsters, or Pokemon for short. A common RPG.
So because of a trademark issue, that's why they had to change it. So it literally would have been, instead of Pokemon, it would be Capamon? It might be Capamon? Capsule Monsters? Capamon. It would literally be Capamon instead of Pokemon. Interesting.
Trope, checking into a hotel or inn, was detailed in the concept pitch. Of course, players can still go to a Pokemon Center in the final game and heal their Pokemon, but it doesn't offer a room for the player to rest in. Another clear difference from the final games are the Shopkeepers. This drawing depicts the main character trying to buy a Lapras from a shopkeeper, who can be seen keeping Pokemon in cages. While there's an opportunity in the Gen 1 games to exchange Pokemons for tokens at Celadon City, it's certainly not possible in the Pokémarts. The document also features a charisma stat, being able to trade multiple Pokemon at once, and an emphasis on collecting items like you would Pokemon.
There was a charisma stat, so like if you were kind, kind of, I guess, then you would maybe get more from the capsule monsters.
Additionally, the included sketches show a talk option when facing a trainer, as well as the total amount of HP and TP each Pokemon has during battles. TP was probably a precursor for PP and most likely stood for technical points. The drawings also depict the ability to sell your Pokemon for gold, the currency that was used before it was switched to yen. Not only that, it's likely that an early idea was to assign a gold value to each Pokemon, as well as an intelligence stat, as evident in this sketch.
Intelligence! Imagine if you caught a Pokemon and it has like 1 intelligence.
Surprisingly, the concept pitch also includes a female version of the protagonist, something that was introduced for the first time in Pokemon Crystal. Speaking of the protagonist, an early idea was to let the player character participate in battles. The original player sprite can be seen holding a whip and has a tougher looking physique.
Whoa!
At one time, the protagonist would fight as well, but then we asked ourselves, if you can fight on your own, what's the point of having Pokemon?
So originally, it was it was the trainers and the Pokemon masters could fight with, what was it, like a whip? Use weapons, I guess. Yeah.
The fact that features such as buying Pokemon from shopkeepers and the player participating in battles were cut from the final game is also a result of the team deciding to treat Pokemon more like friends instead of pets. It was also around this time that GameFreak started to lean more towards the Pokemon collecting aspect and less towards creating a more traditional RPG.
Okay.
When we were writing the text for the Pokédex, we started talking about how fun it was to collect Pokemon. We felt the story about a boy traveling to fill up his Pokédex was more appropriate for modern times than a tale of a hero battling an evil villain.
That makes a lot of sense, and also with the creator's backstory as to what made him have the idea for it in the first place. He was the young boy traveling and collecting insects, Mr. Dr. Bug, as he was called by his peers. Wow. That's cool that they like kind of went back to that original idea and thought that collecting the Pokemon was much better than really, talk of battling. Yeah, like being a hero kind of.
An early sketch of the Kanto map can also be found inside the document and reveals early landmarks based on the real-life Kanto region in Japan. These landmarks were later reworked into locations such as the Pokemon Tower and Saffron City. Fun fact, Pallet Town is based on Satoshi's hometown Mashita. The Pokeball,
really?
referred
That's
to
cool.
as Monster Capsule in the document, also looked quite differently from the final version. Its white and red colors are switched and the button is located on the bottom instead of the side of the ball. Based on this sketch, it's speculated an early idea might have been to shrink down Pokemon to fit inside their Pokeballs, instead of being absorbed by a beam of light. Ken Sugimori, who led the design team, and Atsuko Nishida started drawing loads of different Pokemon designs. Atsuko is actually the one who came up with the designs for Pikachu, the 3 starter Pokemon, and many others.
Wow, that's cool. Pikachu, Charmander, Bulbasaur, Squirtle, Ponyta. Is that a Lapras?
Ken always finalized each design and drew every Pokemon in multiple angles to make it easier for his colleagues to get a good understanding of all the pocket monsters and render them the correct way. Both artists kept sketching more and more Pokemon, a lot more than the 151 that ended up in the games. The concept document confirms that over 200 different Pokemon were considered and were in various stages of completion. Developers at GameFreak later confirmed in interviews that multiple Pokemon were indeed scrapped, and that the total number was reduced to their favorite 151 designs. This took a lot of effort according to Junichi Masuda, who worked on the original games as a composer, programmer and designer. To facilitate this and make sure everyone at GameFreak was happy with the designs, the studio organized popularity polls every so often where all the devs were able to provide suggestions and offer feedback.
That's really cool that they provided that. Interesting. I'm just kind of looking at like the names on the popularity poll. Boo, B-U-U. Kadabra, Scyther, Mankey, Balloonda. It's all floaty. I like it. I was just reading the description.
The general look of all Pokemon also went through some changes. At the start of
The
development,
whip.
most designs had
It's
a
crazy.
rather consistent look to them, often resembling dinosaur-like monsters. So it's no coincidence that the first 3 Pokemon ever designed were Rhydon, Clefairy and Lapras. Lots of designs were also created with specific roles in mind, because early on, the devs envisioned Pokemon living alongside humans to help them with specific tasks. Along the way, the developers discovered that battles were rather boring if there's only weak and strong Pokemon. It was clear they needed to introduce more variety in the designs and find a way to make battles more engaging. Therefore,
make it more
types were
interesting.
introduced to the game's concept midway through development, and now the artists started to think about designs based on specific types such as water and fire. It simultaneously added some much-needed strategy to the combat. Furthermore, it gave the team the idea to begin the player's journey by letting them choose a starter Pokemon that's either water, fire, or grass type. An early drawing also showcases a Pokemon hatching from an egg, something that was later introduced in Pokemon Silver and Gold. When all the 151 Pokemon designs were finished and approved, they started brainstorming about all the attack moves each Pokemon could use. There wasn't an initial plan of which Pokemon would receive which moves. Instead, the team came up with the moves separate from their Pokemon designs and then gradually assigned moves that would fit well with each Pokemon. Just this process of
That
designing the
makes sense.
Pokemon and their moveset alone took about 3 years to complete.
3
Nowadays,
years?
we're used to getting
That's
yearly
crazy.
Pokemon games, but Satoshi and his team were coming up with the popular formula
Yeah.
of exploring mysterious areas, collecting Pokemon,
Wow.
and fighting your way through all the gyms for the first time ever. Additionally, the team back then was much smaller compared to the 150 plus employees working at GameFreak now. Junichi
Wow.
remembers how only 9 people worked on the original games.
9 people only worked on the original games. That's crazy. What?
We could hardly even be called a company at the time. We were just almost like a college club or something, where
That's so
people
cool.
who were interested would just gather and hang out. They'd
Yeah.
come to work whenever they want, leave whenever they want. Some people would be sleeping over because they worked so hard into the night.
Wow.
Something the team focused on from the very beginning was interactive communication. Most other developers were using the Game Boy's link cable to compete, but Satoshi saw it as a way to exchange data between players. While he
Oh.
likes competition too, he explained that the concept of one-on-one communication is very Japanese, and he wanted to translate that to a video game. Implementing trading would unfortunately become one of the most challenging aspects throughout development, since it was only possible
Ooh.
to transfer tiny amounts of data between 2 Game Boys.
I could
Junichi
imagine
admits that
back in the
technology
day.
just
Yeah.
wasn't there yet, but Game Freak fought to make it happen anyway.
Wow.
A staple of Pokemon games is that every generation has at least 2 versions, but this idea actually didn't come from Game Freak themselves. The developers were thinking of how to make trading more attractive for players, but couldn't immediately come up with the right idea. When Satoshi went to Nintendo to talk about their progress, none other than the creator of Mario, Shigeru Miyamoto, suggested creating 2 separate cartridges with exclusive Pokemon to catch so people would be motivated to trade with each other.
Wow, so the creator of Mario suggested the 2 separate game ideas for trading. Oh, interesting.
Rare and legendary Pokemon that are more difficult to catch were also included for the same reason.
Yeah.
With an emphasis on interactive communication and shifting from treating Pokemon as friends instead of pets, it's no surprise that Satoshi explained that he's careful about violence in video games, which is why
Yes.
Pokemon faint rather than die. When a
Yes.
Pokemon runs out of HP, Satoshi was very careful in communicating to the player that the Pokemon is still alive through the animation, the text on screen, and sound effects. I think
Wow.
that young people playing games have an abnormal concept about dying. They start to lose and say, "I'm dying." It's not right for kids to think about the concept of death that way. They need to treat death with more respect.
Wow.
There was one extremely stressful moment during development that could have destroyed years of work, and perhaps even prevented Pokemon from ever releasing. The original games were developed on Unix computer stations that crashed fairly frequently, but the devs learned how to deal with it without ever losing important data. Except for one time after about 4 years of development when they had to deal with a very bad crash.
Oh no.
Nobody at the studio knew what to do, or how to recover the data that had all of the Pokemon, the main character, the map, and pretty much everything else that was created until that point.
No,
Junichi recalls
really?
thinking that if they can't recover the files, they would be ruined. After contacting the old company he used to work for, asking people online for help, and reading multiple books about the Unix machines, Junichi and the rest of the team eventually figured out how to recover the data.
Wow.
The soundtrack, sound effects, and Pokemon cries were all composed by Junichi. To accomplish this, he used his Commodore Amiga computer at home and converted his creations to the Game Boy with software he had written himself.
That's
With only
cool.
4 available sound channels to work with, Junichi had to get extra creative to compose a memorable and fitting soundtrack for the first Pokemon games, as well as unique cries for each Pokemon. Near the end of development in 1996, the team started to get really worried about releasing their games on the Game Boy. The console was almost 7 years old at that point, and it was clear that, at least in Japan, the Game Boy was on a steep decline. It was so bad, in fact, that when the team talked to friends in the game industry, their friends would sound surprised and comment that it's probably not going to sell very well. Even Nintendo had its doubts about the project and didn't expect much from it. Earlier on in development, Satoshi was even told that Nintendo didn't really understand the concept of the game and the appeal of collecting monsters.
Imagine if it never came to fruition. Wow. The biggest game company in the world. Imagine if... Wow, imagine. Oh, man. Even the biggest game company in the world had its doubts ahead of itself. Wow.
Furthermore, there was a notion in the Japanese game industry that role-playing games created by a Japanese company may not sell well overseas, so GameFreak wasn't even thinking about releasing it outside of Japan at the time. It's safe to say that both GameFreak and Nintendo weren't expecting all that much from Satoshi's Pocket Monsters.
Wow.
Selling 1 million units, for example, would defy their wildest expectations. After 6 long years, Pokémon Red and Pokémon Green were finally finished and released on February 27, 1996 in Japan. That
Red
day,
and
the whole
Green
team went to different stores to see
in
how
Japan
the games were
first.
doing, and they could tell it was actually selling fairly well. Of course, without social media or the internet as we know it today, they didn't know if people were actually enjoying it, and what the exact numbers were for copies sold. Pretty soon, however, the developers saw deposits from Nintendo coming in, hinting Red and Green were selling even better than they expected. Not long after, newspaper articles were saying how Pokémon was becoming the new big thing with kids, and its popularity quickly started to accelerate from there. It wasn't until later when you started seeing, okay, there's going to be an animated series. Oh, there's going to be a card game. Now there's a manga weekly publication.
Wow.
When those things expanded into this multimedia thing in Japan, we really started to feel like, oh whoa, this is a big deal now. The overwhelming success of Red and Green gave GameFreak the opportunity to develop an improved version called Pokémon Blue, and was made available exclusively for subscribers of CoroCoro Comic in October 1996. It removed a number of bugs and featured graphical changes such as overhauled tile sets, new sprites for all the Pokémon, and more. Unsurprisingly, Blue was used as the basis for all the localized versions, and the American one is responsible for switching Pokémon Green with Pokémon Blue. Originally, it was kind of based on how people feel about and view different colors. The clearest split for us was between Red and Green, but when we started thinking about abroad, it was clear that wasn't the case. In America in particular, it's Red and Blue that are considered opposites, if you will.
I didn't know that, to be honest, you know. That's interesting thinking about that, the fact that here it's, Red and Blue are kind of the yin and yang almost. And overseas it's Red and Green. That's interesting. I just think of Red and Green as Christmas.
Localizing Pokemon was by far the biggest technical challenge GameFreak had to deal with, and this all came down to capacity. Squeezing all 151 Pokemon into the original games was already a difficult task, and they had to use clever techniques to make everything work on the cartridge. Unfortunately,
back then,
the team discovered that English takes up more space than Japanese.
Really?
Junichi admitted they hadn't really considered localization during development, so changing things like Pokemon names, the name entry screen and the Pokédex, which were all specifically designed in Japanese, was far more difficult and time-consuming than anticipated.
Wow, really?
Before the games would take America by storm, the animated Pokemon TV show was released weeks prior and proved to be a smart strategic move to get people excited about Pokemon as a universe. After 8 years since development officially began, Pokemon Red and Blue were finally released in North America. And
so the show was released before the games in America? Really? To drum up hype, I guess?
soon in the rest of the world, turning Pokémon into a global unforeseen success. In 1997, it was already the best-selling game in Japan, surpassing even Final Fantasy VII with 3.65 million copies sold. The games duplicated that achievement in the United States in 1999 by selling 6.1 million copies. Estimated total worldwide sales reached over 31 million copies for the first generation of Pokémon games alone. An important contributing factor for these numbers is the fact that lots of people were buying both versions available to them. What began as a way to motivate players to trade turned into an unexpected financial boost. Junichi Masuda recalls the ridiculous amount of product review requests of companies that wanted to make Pokemon merchandise once the games were available overseas. And while the games certainly generate a lot of money, even to this day, it's the merchandise that catapulted Pokemon to the highest grossing
the merchandise is like 4 times.
The global success of the anime also prompted GameFreak to create yet another version of the first generation of Pokemon games called Pokemon Yellow. It was made with a purpose to more closely resemble the TV show, and featured elements like Pikachu as the only starter, your rival receiving Eevee, Team Rocket, and more. GameFreak learned invaluable lessons during those first 6 years of developing Red and Green, which were both very liberating and very challenging. Even though the studio had to work on other projects to keep the lights on, the initial freedom as a young company allowed them to not care about things like sales and investors, resulting in the team solely focusing on being as creative as possible and considering every single idea that came to mind. Despite numerous aspects potentially holding the original games back, it managed to thrive way beyond GameFreak's and Nintendo's expectations.
Wow.
Satoshi's original vision of exploration and monster collecting obviously struck a chord with both kids and adults, and continues to do so today. When you're a kid and you get your first bike, you want to go somewhere you've never been before. That's like Pokémon. Everybody shares the same experience, but everybody wants to take it someplace else. And you can do that. Receiving a bicycle as a present, catching bugs, and going fishing, I realized that all of these experiences that I felt were just mine were shared by all kids. I guess that's why people all around the world embraced it.
Yeah. That's so cool. Wow, that's very insightful. That's very insightful to the background of Pokemon. Wow. Hey there, thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. If you want to see more of my content, feel free to subscribe. If you want to see even more content, I film all of my videos live on my Twitch channel. Feel free to click the first link in the description. Be sure to follow my Twitch channel and know exactly when I go live. Interact with me live on stream, as well as other people in chat, and see a look behind the scenes on every video that I film. Thank you so much. Bye!